Hello and welcome back to the podcast. So today we're going to be talking to Annie. So Annie, you've just blown up you're on TikTok and now LinkedIn, right?
Yes, I am.
TikTok is the new frontier that I'm so old at this point. Like all the young people are on there. I'm like, I just don't want to come off as
I hear that so
super
much. I hear that
cringy.
so much.
So, yeah, why don't you just kind of start off with telling us kind of your story of like how very recent, somewhat recently, within the past 2-3 years, broken into analytics?
This year.
Oh, this year. All
hmm
right. So let's start from the top. So how did you get into analytics?
Yeah, so I actually just finished my master's degree in occupational therapy, which is like physical therapy. Like it's not analytics at all. But while I was in graduate school, I just spent a lot of time advocating for myself and others and not being taught. And I just got really burned out from that experience. And so I just felt like I didn't learn for like 3 years, pay a lot of money to not learn. So in January, I was feeling so burned out that I was like, I need to do something to like refill my soul. So I just started learning data analytics for fun. I thought maybe I could like organize someone's spreadsheets for them as a side gig if I got good enough at it. And so I just Googled, like I like had heard how the tech thing is like remote. So I just kind of Googled tech roles and then I saw data analytics. I was like, oh, that seems like how my brain works. So I Googled how to learn data analytics and the Google Data Analytics certificate came up. And I thought that the first course was all of it. So I started taking it. I was like, I'll definitely finish this in a week. And then after the first week, I was like, there's 8 courses. So, but I loved it. I was like, yeah, I think I'll give this a try. And then we got into the SQL, which I initially was like, I don't want to learn this. I didn't even know what SQL and Tableau were at the beginning of 2022. But
Oh,
I started
wow.
learning them and I was like, this stuff is so cool. And I was like, this is so fascinating. It's so interesting. So I was documenting the journey on TikTok because I thought, hey, if I could do this and successfully turn it into a side hustle, I bet a lot of people on TikTok would love to know that because I've only spent $40 on this course. So I like quickly reached 10,000 followers on TikTok. And then um, I kind of in like April, I was traveling in Austin and I was still working on this stuff remotely. And it kind of clicked in my brain that I was like, I really like the idea of being able to work remotely. Like I'm about to enter a profession where I'm going to have to be in person every day. I was doing a fieldwork placement at an assisted living facility where all of these ideals that we had learned in school were just not happening at the facility. And there was
Mm,
a lot of things that really I found blocked us from providing good patient care. Like we couldn't tell the nurses that someone probably had Alzheimer's because they didn't want to hear it from us. But meanwhile, it was to their detriment that no one knew and was catching it. So just kind of that just culmination of things happened. And I got onto LinkedIn really just for job searching purposes. And then I kind of socially started getting a following there too. Like my posts performed like really well right out the bat. And so I just kind of like went with it. And then I was like, all right, I'll try the job search thing. And if it doesn't work out, I still have a master's degree that I'm graduating with in August. And I do actually like the field. And then in July, I got offered my position and it's a remote job. It's as a Tableau consultant. So I get to do both design and techie codey stuff, which I think was really cool. And it was at a startup with like a really, really great culture and they pay me well. And so I started doing that and I like within the first month I traveled to Asheville and I went paragliding and I've since been to Austin for 2.5 weeks and I'm going to go to Australia and New Zealand in February. So I am loving it, fully hooked, and just in every sense, I love my job. So yeah, kind of a
uh,
weird little story.
yeah. Well, no, I feel like there's so many like different little threads that we can kind of parse out from that.
Yes.
Because one thing that it's ironic because you were talking to a professor. So I teach at Greensboro College. It's very cool that you were in
Mm,
North Carolina, by the way. I'm like 3 hours, I guess, east of Asheville in Greensboro.
yeah.
But yeah, I see what you're talking about. Where it's there, it seems like there's this gap or this like vast chasm between like what is actually taught and what actually goes on in the real world. And I don't know why that seems to be getting wider. Also, it's also getting more expensive. So it's like you're paying more for
Hmm.
things that are so theoretical that you don't have a skill coming out
I
of
think that a
undergrad.
large problem is that the boards, you know, the people who certify the schools and everything, they have a list of requirements that they have to fulfill. And so they have to teach all of this theory stuff. They have to check so many boxes, which is something that I appreciate about data because like you kind of learn what you need to know for it and then you can add things on, but you don't have to just spend, I mean, if you get a computer science degree, you do, but if you just get into it the way that I didn't have to spend a year learning all of this theory. I mean, I certainly graduate school teaches you how to think and everything. I think more so maybe for other people. My program, I think the problem was just that my professors are probably good therapists, but they just are not teachers. And
Mm,
they just did a lot of like, here is a PowerPoint that I pulled from the book, and I'm going to just lecture. And then everything on the test is going to be pure regurgitation of, did you read page 350 of the textbook, paragraph 3? And if not, you won't
right.
get the question right.
Well,
And I hated that.
it's the ultimate irony because they talk about critical thinking all the time, but what they're basically implementing is just memorization. And
Yeah.
then like
Yeah. So I
like
became
you're
like addicted when I started taking the data courses because it was like, okay, so we're going to give you not only the video lecture, but you can read it because I don't listen to podcasts. I don't watch YouTube videos. I want to read it. So they give you the transcript so you can go through it at your own speed. They gave you the projects. Every single quiz that you took was open book and then you got to see the answers. I hated that in graduate school. They kind of would gatekeep it so they could reuse the questions. So I'd never got to learn from what I got wrong, you know?
mm, yeah,
So
that
like
is
in the data
frustrating.
space, it just is so well designed for learning and really at all different types of learning. And that, as long as you're self-directed, and I have loved that.
Yeah, well, it's kind of like the Wild West right now. Like you can learn any type of skill for free. I mean, it's going to take
Hmm.
more time and energy. Like you're going to have to throw more sweat equity than like if you go through a program, they lay out a curriculum and it's kind of like here's step one, step two, step three. But yeah, I mean, you can basically bootstrap your career and do. I mean, that's wild that you completely transition spaces. And now, I mean, I'll be honest, like you're doing more technical stuff than I am. Like I don't even know how to code in SQL. I've been in the space for like 6, 7 years.
Yeah. I what I like about my job too is that I can kind of slowly ease my way into more technical things because if I like have a client, because we're consultants, so I work full time for my company, but they bring it, so I consult to them. So if I had a client that suddenly had a really challenging like SQL database thing that I had to pull over, there's people at my company who could do that, so it doesn't come down to me. But then I can learn from that, and then hopefully in the future
Right.
I can do that. And so it's a really good the startup environment, you know, you're not boxed into like this is exactly what you do. You get to kind of learn and grow and with the company and the company learns and grows with you.
Yeah. Well, so I guess I technically have an educational startup right now. So we launched an apprenticeship program 6 months ago, and we've had 4
Hmm.
cohorts, and now we have, as of last month, doubled in size. And it looks like this month we're going to continue with that new. I guess I feel like I've been shot out of a cannon, and I'm just trying to figure everything else out. But I'm excited because what we're doing now is kind of I'm actually bringing on Ian. So Ian is how I met you because he said you were the
Hmm.
one who inspired him to get on. So he's going
Great.
to come on and start coaching with me. But so Hunter is actually I'm going to bring him later on in the chat. So he's one of my students that I taught at High Point University, and he's doing coaching for technical office hours. And then my social media manager is helping people with their LinkedIn and actually getting they're doing a once the LinkedIn hard mode. So it's one post a day for 30 days. And
Hmm.
then here's the kicker that I'm really, really excited about is we did a data challenge probably about 6, 8, 9 months ago. And the person who won that challenge was preparing for an interview. Turns out
Hmm.
the person who hired him has reached out to me, and now I have a hiring manager on my team. He's going to be
That's
like
great.
coaching people. So
That's really
yeah,
great.
but you juxtapose that with like the typical business school and their career academicians. They've like never gone out into the real world. They like
Hmm.
are in their like little ivory tower and they haven't actually like consulted. I mean, some of them
Yeah.
are. So
Hmm.
because what I've noticed, like in my MBA, there were a couple people who were like very successful, retired, got bored, and then came back and taught.
Mm.
And those are the
Yeah.
best teachers in my opinion, personally.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. That's
So
great.
So do you like working remotely though?
I love it. There's nothing about it that I don't love. I know some people say I need to be in person for XYZ. Literally none of the above for me. I like that I can be in my own space and I can cook. I like that I can play whatever music at whatever volume I want. I can just, wear shorts or sweatpants or whatever. I don't have to commute. I have issues. I have an autoimmune disorder in my brain, so I have a hard time with lots of movement in my visual field, and so I get these migraines, and I am able to control them a lot when I'm able to control my own environment and how much
Right.
I move around. But if I have to commute and I have to, be in spaces where like grocery stores and like bookstores are very hard for me because there's so much so close to you moving. So not having to do any of that means that I almost never get a migraine on a day that I'm working. And the fact that I can control my own body like that is just really big for me.
Yeah, that is awesome. All right, so we got a question from. See, people don't put their real names on their YouTube or accounts. So Turning Point asks, please elaborate more on how she tackled Python, SQL, etc. So how did you learn coding? Is essentially what this person is asking.
So in the Google Data Analytics certificate, they went into SQL and gave me a very good foundation, and then they also went into R and gave me a good foundation of that. Um, but then afterwards, I had no idea what I was doing, and so I just kind of was like, oh, I heard that data analysts need Python. So then I went and took a 30 days of Python course with Angela Yu through Udemy. And her course was really, really good, but honestly, it was basically a waste of my time. Like I loved it, but it
That's
was
such a
not.
contradiction there.
It was so cool to learn it, but in terms of becoming a data analyst, it was a total waste of my time, and I have not used it at all. I think that Maven Analytics has a course that I'm looking at, which is Python for data analysts, that might be more relevant. But the course that I took was like how to design web apps and stuff. I didn't do a single thing with like downloading spreadsheets and like analyzing them in the course because it was all like building web apps and stuff. So it was fascinating to learn how to think in programs and functions and everything. But in terms of like, especially for my resume and talking to hiring managers, did not help me at all. So that was a month of my time I dedicated to that. I think now when I
Wow.
put out my content and people ask me, what did you do? Um, I tell them what I did, but then I say, what I think that you should do is I think that you should take a course, can be a free course, a paid course, whatever, to learn SQL and then go out there and build a portfolio. Because that is
Yeah.
really how I tackled learning. I learned the foundations, but how I actually learned is I went out there and I did multiple Tableau projects, which you can see on my Tableau public. I did multiple SQL projects. And I just found data sets and I practiced. And every time I was like, oh, there's this thing I want to find out about this data set. I don't know how to. I would Google it and then I would learn it. And that is really how I tackled learning. So I know that people like to talk about these courses and, oh, what course can I take to learn this thing? And I think any course, as long as it's not a bad course, give you the foundation. But then the real key is being able to go and learn it on your own. Because if you get a job, you need to be able to problem solve and figure this out on your own because you can't go to your boss every single time be like, I don't know this function. I don't know how to do this. You have to be able to figure it out on your
Right.
own.
So I've got an even more controversial take. I think skills don't really matter. Like they do to an extent, but it's almost like it's this hyperfixation with people to where
Mhm.
we're placing people through our program that don't have the skill set, but they're
Yeah.
interviewing so well that hire managers are saying like, look, I can see because of how you've interviewed, I can see that you're like a very effective worker.
Yes.
I can see
Hmm.
that, it's funny you mentioned Python. We had someone get an $85,000 offer for a job as an analyst or data scientist working in Python. She hadn't even touched a line of Python code, but they liked her
Hmm.
so much. They said, we're willing to take a risk on you. You fit really
Yep.
well with our company culture. We're going to pay you that rate. We're going to pay for Python training, and we're going to pay for your time to go through
Hmm.
that. So I
Yep.
think that I get it. It's like I think most people suffer with imposter syndrome, and they're like, if I don't check every single one of these line items, I'm not going to get this job.
Hmm.
But what's interesting is, have you heard of Harnum? It's a recruiting agency. It's like the
Yeah,
biggest
I have.
analytics one.
Hmm.
So what's wild is I met with one of the co-founders 2 days ago, and
Hmm.
he's since spun off. But he was saying that there's a massive problem with hiring managers where they'll list everything. So it's almost like comparing yourself to someone's like Facebook or TikTok feed. And it's like, this is
Yeah,
their highlight
or
reel. And
Instagram.
it's like, this is the cool stuff they do in their lifetime. And you're comparing that to your day to day, to where this is
Hmm.
almost the same thing that's happening on these job postings.
It's a wish list, really. No, I actually totally agree with that. When I got my job, I had some Tableau projects, but like to be at the level that I was at in Tableau and what is needed at my job, vastly different. But what and my boss and the VP of my company just left, but there's a new VP, and they all agree on the same point that we are not looking to hire people who have the best, especially for the entry level. I mean, hires, but the entry level position, we are not looking to have somebody hire somebody who's an expert. We are looking to hire somebody who shows that they are curious, that they are willing to learn. And so I think that skills don't matter, but I think that in order, that's why I'm so adamant about building a portfolio, because I think that if you show, hey, I'm really interested in learning this stuff, so much so that I went out, I found data sets, I found these things, and I analyzed it in SQL and in Tableau. I did one project that was like I found a Python script and I reverse engineered it in SQL just because I was really interested. And then when I got to my interviews, I was able to talk very passionately and very excitedly about I created this project and I thought that it was so cool. And all of these things. And I think that it wasn't the skills that I was showing to them because really, looking back, like it really, the project that I showed them was very, entry level, which was fine. But it was my passion and my excitement and my drive for self-directed learning that was sticking out. And I did have interviews with, or phone screens really, where they were like, have you been using SQL for a year? And I said no, and they didn't call me back. So,
Right.
and there are definitely times that skills matter, but
Well,
for
nothing ventured,
people
nothing
who,
gained. So it's like, don't
yeah,
sweat it.
yeah, but for people who are, for the roles that are open to people who are actually entry level, you're right. The skills don't matter, but the portfolio is how you show, yes, I do want to work for you. I do want to do this because look, I'm already doing it. Whether or not I'm doing it well, I'm doing it.
Right. Well, and it's interesting because I've as of this year, this is the first time I've been in a position where I'm hiring people. So I've got that perspective of I think I would much rather have someone who's kind of like a diamond in the rough that's really wants to show up and really like is passionate about like the project that we're doing or the vision
Mhm.
versus someone who is like a top of the line expert but is
Yeah.
kind of lethargic and kind of like just not bought
And top of
in.
the line experts have their own ways of doing things, and you're going to have to bend that when you come into a new role. And so if you hire somebody who's got a lot of skills and they want to do it their way, it's going to be more work for you to try and get them to bend to your way.
Right. All right. So someone asked another interesting question, circling back to SQL. So how would you rate your SQL level?
I think that I'm probably beginner to intermediate. I use Tableau regularly at my job. I did fairly well on my SQL technical interviews, but I don't use a ton of SQL for my current role. A lot of Tableau things look very SQL-ish, but definitely not a SQL expert.
Gotcha. Okay. So can you be explicit around like are there like three things that you need to know or five things or it's like what are the kind of like categories or brackets of like what you would need to know if you wanted to get an entry level analyst role that required SQL?
That required SQL. I'm not actually, that's a good question. I'm not sure that I'm the best person to answer that. I think that what I was doing is I just like, there's the data lemur, there's status scratch, there's hacker rank, there's those websites that you can use to practice. So I think that pretty much any course, whether it's from DataCamp or Maven or Google, they're going to teach you all of the core concepts you need to know in SQL. And then I and like you said, I think a lot of times they're hiring people with the intention of training them. And so I think what's going to matter most is doing well on your technical interviews. And I think in order to do well on your technical interviews, you need to kind of know the things that kind of come up commonly on those websites, but then also be able to show the ability to problem solve through it. I had more than one technical interview where they threw me for an absolute loop, and it was like open book. I could Google things, but like I had no idea how to do it. I'm like Googling things and it like showed everything you typed so they could see me like think through it. And afterwards,
Mhm.
one of them, the interviewer, was like, I really loved seeing your thinking process on that. I got other job offers besides the one I got, and some of them were heavier in SQL. And they're like, I really loved seeing you think through it. I could see you were like really problem solving very well, and you were like effectively and quickly utilizing whatever resources you were using. So I completely botched it and didn't even come close to getting an answer, but I impressed them.
Right. It's almost
Does that
like,
answer the question?
yeah. Well, I mean, see, because I get that question all the time about SQL, and it's like it's outside of my depth. Like I don't know. Like
Mm-hmm.
I because I've been running a consulting agency for 6 years at this point, and most of my clients are in the medium to small size market, and they just don't
Mm-hmm.
require SQL. Like I
Yeah.
think we signed our first $1 billion client last year, and that one was the
Wow.
first time that like I needed a full SQL database.
Mm-hmm.
And well, actually, they had that was like a perfect client engagement, and they had a data architect build out their entire infrastructure and then dumped
Mm-hmm.
everything into Tableau, and then Hunter came in and just built out the dashboard infrastructure. So
Yeah,
that
and
was
in
like,
Tableau, I use a lot of case statements, like that I think being able to think in that kind of if-then logic, and being able to think in that kind of case-when logic for any analytics role is going to be really important because I think probably any analytics role, you can tell me if you agree with it or this or not, you're going to have to be using logic because you're going to need to adjust everything you're doing to specific scenarios. Do you agree with that?
so I think I'm essentially a management consultant that uses like light analytics.
Mm-hmm.
And the sweet spot that I've carved out is like in the medium to small size business market, just going from 0 to 1 is worth millions of
Mm-hmm.
dollars to these clients. So that's
Mm-hmm.
where I've carved out to where it sounds like what you're doing is a lot more in depth and like to
Mine
where,
is all my clients are all small to medium sized too. None of them are
oh,
super
interesting.
huge. Like I just built someone's product the other day. They have a company, they're pulling publicly available data that is very difficult to kind of aggregate. And for the first time aggregating it for their group of their target audience. And so I in Tableau built it's going to be on an iPad and he shows it to them. And if they want to purchase his service, they use that. So that whole interface I just built.
That's really
So, but
cool.
he's just sending me Excel spreadsheets, and I'm just in
Right. Yeah. So
Tableau.
I'm just
You
mainly
know?
going just from Excel to Tableau. Although what's
Yeah,
interesting is that I'm realizing
me too.
I'm not as interested in analytics work as I am as the career services stuff. Like I'm geeking
Hmm.
out real hard about like understanding, you know, like it seems like a problem that no one's really solved yet. Like not in the at least coming from the world of academia, that seems like they're just so far away from what's going on day to day. Now,
Hmm.
one thing I've had probably 150 people that I've interviewed over the last 6 months, and I have talked to a couple people at like Ivy League schools or the top 10, 20% of schools. They do seem to kind of have it figured out, but you're going to be paying like $110,000, $200,000 for your degree.
Hmm.
So,
Hmm.
I think I'm just interested in like the whole higher education market because it seems like it is an institution that's just like rife for disruption. Like
Yeah,
I think it's
I think
crumbling.
I think that there are some boot camps that probably do a good job with that interface. I'm very unfamiliar with the higher education angle of getting into data because I just did self-directed courses and
Right.
I started learning in February. I got my job in July, and that was realistically only because the company I was interviewing with, we had a bunch. There was like holidays and people were off. Could have happened like a month sooner. So like I could have been from February to June. I could have. And so that space, similarly to what you're saying, has this problem of if you want to teach yourself to get into data analytics, the hardest part is going to be your job search and that middle
Right.
space of you can take as many free courses as you want or paid courses or whatever, you can build a portfolio. That alone isn't going to land you a job. And like you said, interviewing well, understanding how to build your LinkedIn presence, how to host your portfolio, all of those things, that middle space, I've only seen very few people trying to address that problem. And those like companies that are doing that to help job seekers, I like regularly in my comments will send people to them because I'm like, they're doing this either for free or very cheap. Go look at this
Yeah.
because yeah, like you said, there's this huge gap of these kind of career services for these people who are kind of doing it their own way.
Well, what I think is interesting is that I think we're, especially in this space, everyone's very analytical thinking, obviously, but it's almost like a cobbler's kids. Like the cobbler's kids have no shoes. It's like they don't take a critical lens of themselves. So where I had
Mm-hmm.
a recent situation with one of my students where he had finished up a master's degree, um, but he had worked at a major bank for 3 years as a fraud analyst, and then like we were kind of role playing, like, hey, tell me your biggest win. And then he starts telling me about this simulation that he did in his capstone in his master's program. And it's like fake data, it's small data, it's not even that impressive, versus he
Yeah.
uncovered $1 million fraud as an analyst working for this major bank. And it's like, I said, tell me your biggest win. And you're talking about this like little, not even real project.
Yeah.
But it's funny because it's like he paid for that master's program, probably a lot of money. So it's like it kind of tricks you into this false thinking of like that's valuable, when really
Mm-hmm.
the work like he didn't even need to get that master's degree. He probably could have just shored up his story, got his story straight, and then gone directly into a promotion from there.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of it is just the psychology of navigating your career, which I find it's funny because it's like endlessly fascinating to me. Like I
Mm-hmm.
just love the psychology aspect of it.
Yeah. There's so many different ways to do it too.
True. All right. On a hard turn here. So Raj is a PhD student over at UNCG, like 2 miles away from me. So he was
Yeah.
wondering, how much statistics do you use in your job?
So Tableau does a lot of these things for you. I have been recently thinking about taking a statistics course through Maven Analytics, who I love, because I think it'd be really interesting to have a kind of a broader depth of knowledge about it. When I was getting my master's degree, I did take statistics courses and I did do a research project, and I was very interested. I actually became like a TA for the research course because I was like so into it. So I have a good knowledge of like kind of the foundations of those things. So in terms of how much I use, not a lot. I did recently have a client who came on and they wanted to have count like a count of the total of the thing, and then a total value in terms of money, and then they wanted to have an average. And I was like, I think it's going to be really important for you to have median also reflected on your dashboard, because I think that seeing the total value of everything is just going to be interesting but not helpful to them, because they want to see how they fit in terms of their competitors. So I think that if you're like a very small player and you see that the average is $200,000, it's really not going to be relevant to you. But then if you see that actually the median is only $90,000, then that's going to be much more relevant. So that was my hypothesis. There would be a big gap between the average and the median. And then I was right. And now we do have it on the dashboard. So that was an instance that I did use statistics, but usually like Tableau has like a clustering function that you can just drop it on and it'll do it for you. Anytime you're using sum, average, median, all that stuff, Tableau does it for you. So I think I just have to have, for now at least, and until I take on like bigger clients maybe, um, I just need to have an understanding of the real fundamentals of statistics.
Right. It's funny because I don't have like a in-depth knowledge of statistics. Just being like essentially what you described there is just changing the aggregation.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So
And
changing
I
the
understand
aggregation.
standard deviation. I think that's important to just
Yeah,
understand that concept.
the bell curve. So okay, so maybe I know a little bit about statistics, but I'm not like a math. Like I've had students of mine who are math majors, and they can just
Mm,
run circles around me. As
yeah.
far as like just understanding all those like high theoretical, because at a certain point it almost becomes like philosophy. It's like so abstract.
And it's
Um,
really not that relevant, like you said, to these small to medium-sized businesses. They need to know what is impacting their bottom line. They need to, they have like very concrete answers that they need, and it doesn't usually require some crazy,
no,
maybe if you were to get into like data science and you were to start doing machine learning, whatever. But for people who really just need to know, like, where are they making money, or who is doing the best or whatever, that doesn't require complicated statistics.
well, here's some statistics. So 80% of businesses are in just the descriptive phase of analytics. So all
Mm-hmm.
they're doing is just looking at historical trends to see what happened in the past. So and it's funny because I feel like it's almost that same concept of like over hyperfixation. People are hyperfixating on that, like, what is it, maybe 5% of people who are getting into like prescriptive, like hospitals that can diagnose. So you have these three symptoms and you have this Here's a prescription of what we think is probably going on with you. That is
Mm-hmm.
extremely sophisticated. And there's like, you need, number one, you need massive amounts of data. You need big data. And
Mm-hmm.
you also need the budget for that to even make sense. So
Mm-hmm.
most organizations are just looking back at what happened and learning from that. So I would
Mm-hmm.
say instead of deep diving into math or statistics, learn more about business or whatever function, like the whatever game you're playing. So if it's sales, the game of
And
sales,
psychology.
marketing. What do you mean the psychology of it?
And just learn about the psychology of like, like working with people. Like a lot of
Oh,
my
true.
job is the psychology of working with people. And clients will come to us and they'll say, here's all the things that I want my dashboards to look like. And then we will say, no.
Yeah.
We'll find a way to say, no, that's not what you want. Actually, this is what you want. But you can't just say that to someone,
See, that's an interesting point because I when I first started consulting, I basically just saw myself as an analyst for hire. But then probably a year or two in, I kind of flipped to where I became the more of an advisor, and then they're
Hmm.
looking to me to guide the conversation. And I think
Right.
that is where you start to make a whole lot more money because you're right. You could, if you were just the order taker in that situation, you might spend 50 hours doing something that's not even valuable. Or if you could have
Exactly.
one
Exactly.
specific question and say, hey, well, what about this? And then all of a sudden you save all that time and you come up with something much more effective.
Yeah. But you have to find a way to balance it, right? Because they come in and they know that they're buying your services and they paid for your services and they know what they want. And so then to say, I hear you, but I think that you want this instead is
Right.
it takes a lot of skill to be able to do that.
That is tricky. And it also applies dealing with the power balance with your manager or your manager's manager. You know,
Hmm.
like
Hmm.
playing a little bit of the political game. I feel like in a startup, so it's a pretty how big is the startup that you're working at?
I feel like we have like 100 employees or something.
Okay,
Less than that, I think maybe.
so it's not like I interned at a $12 million company, and it was interesting seeing like the rigid hierarchy of that, and like
We do not
how
have a rigid hierarchy.
yeah,
We do not have one. I mean, obviously everyone has their jobs, but I've had the co-founder and now VP like just in office hours like ask me my opinion on something.
that's awesome. Well,
It is
is it?
awesome.
I guess it depends on who you are because that
I mean,
really
he's
comes down
very
to
capable.
values.
He's very capable, but just kind of he just was like, and I want to hear your opinion. And the CEO, Whitney, I love her. When I was in Texas, she went out to lunch with me and she like was interested in hearing my opinion on things. And so it's obviously they have their jobs and they do them, but that not this rigid hierarchy. If you must bow down to me and never ask me any
Right.
questions and never suggest anything I do is wrong, like they've admitted I might be wrong, or we might try out this new policy, it might not work. Tell us, please. And my company is this unicorn, wonderful company that I got super lucky.
That's awesome. Yeah, well, I think it depends on your value structure because so I don't think some people can't stomach the uncertainty of that.
Hmm.
Of number one, because it's like if it's a startup, it's somewhat speculative in nature, you know,
Hmm.
to where like these large and huge institutional like these companies that are so large that they're almost an institution. They're almost like what is the phrase? Too big to fail. Like
Hmm.
that is extremely stable. But what I'm learning is that a lot of those big companies actually pay less than smaller companies, which I think
Yep.
is
If I was
really
an associate
intriguing.
analyst, I'd be making 60K a year. I am not making 60K a year. I am making more than that.
Well, yeah, well, it's interesting because I mean I learned that literally in my last cohort. I had two people who had essentially the same background, 3 years of working experience as an analyst. One got a $66,000 offer, the other one got a $95,000 offer, and
Hmm.
it was like a multi-billion-dollar company doing 66 and a $72 million company doing 95.
It seems to me like those bigger companies also build in that they know they're like, you are at the bottom of the pecking order and we are going to pay you accordingly. Whereas I think in startups, there's kind of this expectation that, like where I was when I first got hired and where I am now, I'm providing exponentially more value to the business, And so what I'm doing every day provides huge value to the business. Whereas like associate analysts who are boxed into one thing for the first huge part of their time at the company, they're not providing huge value to the company. They're doing something important, but in the eyes of the CEO, they're not doing something of huge value. And so I wonder, I don't know, but I wonder if that's part of why they start
You know what I
doing
think?
those intro.
I think it has to do with uncertainty. So I think that the big company, the entry level jobs are essentially like, here's step one, here's step two, here's step three, follow the thing that we laid out in this rubric for you. To where
Mm-hmm.
working for a
Mm-hmm.
smaller company, it's like, we don't even know. Like, he was probably the first person with analytics skills to be hired at that company. And they're like,
Mm-hmm.
we're looking for you to lead this because we don't know
Yeah.
what we need. And
Yep.
that's it's a bigger burden as far as just like,
Big burden.
yeah, because you're not just, being an order taker, you're actually holding the reins and then driving the conversation and the
I
project.
interviewed for a role like that, and I was actually not very interested in it because I was like, I'm so entry level. Like I didn't know what SQL was in January.
Yeah.
I don't feel qualified to lead, and I want you to build a good analytics structure, a foundation, and good data quality, and I don't know how to make that happen.
All right. So, I don't know how to say this. Kyriakos?
Kyriakis, maybe? I know somebody named
Kyriakis.
Kyriakis.
Um, he was asking, what's the difference between a junior and a senior data analyst? What are your thoughts on that? Do you guys have the
So
structure like that, or do you just have analysts?
nope, we just are all just technically. I don't even know what we call ourselves. We all have a different. If you look on LinkedIn, we all have a different like headline. Everyone who's like a
You just
consultant,
you just like
like
claim your own.
we're called like consultants, but we work for a company full time and get benefits. So we're not like so it's yeah. We all
It's like an
everything is kind
in-house
of made up.
consultant. Yeah.
Yeah, we all just kind of make it up. But I think from what I saw from, I've talked to a lot of people, I've seen a lot, the junior analysts, like specifically, especially if they call you a junior analyst, you're going to make more money and you're probably going to be kind of very boxed in of, we know exactly what you want, we want you to do, like you're going to run SQL or Excel or whatever. And it's kind of a very, once you learn what you're doing, it takes a couple months, then you kind of do that. Like you are kind of probably the grunt work. What I've heard is sometimes it's kind of the grunt work of getting things done. Whereas the senior data analysts are oftentimes leading the projects. And so they do more time thinking about how it's going to be done and the structure and stuff, and kind of managing and delegating and everything. That's what I've heard. I haven't experienced that structure personally, but that's what I've heard that the senior analyst is more in charge of the decision making and the data quality, whereas the junior analysts just do it. I want you to
Right.
run this SQL thing.
Yeah. Why I pulled this up was, I think it directly relates to what we were just talking about. I think it has to do with your level of uncertainty. Like the
Mm-hmm.
junior analysts are basically like, this is, we've laid the system out. We just need you to go and like brute force, like run
Exactly. So that's why
this
they pay
Excel
you
formula.
less.
Right. And it's funny because I have a student who's just landed their entry level analyst job from Greensboro College, and she was saying that she is just starting to hit a little bit of burnout because of they'll be like, we need this report and we need this by the end of the day, and she's working like probably 10-hour days on average.
Mm-hmm.
Um, okay, I kind of wanted to get some feedback on my advice that I gave her. I was like, look, you're essentially in a junior analyst role and you're paying your
Yeah.
dues right now.
Mm-hmm.
And I would reframe this as like, you are building a knowledge base and you don't even realize it. But she's also getting to work on like major projects like Coca-Cola and like name brand accounts, which I don't think she realizes like the almost brand equity, if I can borrow that term, that she's building, in
Mm-hmm.
that she's solving all of these complex marketing problems for them. Or I guess I shouldn't say
Yeah.
complex. They're problems to be solved, and she's doing
Yes.
them in it's not Tableau, but it's like a Tableau alternative, and I think that is awesome. But yeah, she's essentially in a junior role, to where a senior role. I think this is actually true. The higher you go up the organization, the less grunt work you do, but you take on more responsibility, which is a burden into itself.
Mm-hmm. Thought work and meetings. As far as your feedback to her, I have thought a lot about this year. When I started my job search, I was like, I want to work at a company that is really respectful of me and has a great culture. I want work-life balance. So I'd heard these things were all possible in tech. And then by the time I got to like month 2 of my job search, I was like, all right, I just want a job. And then I ended up getting really lucky and landing this fantastic job that has great work-life balance. Ironically, this week did have my first long day because the client whose thing I was building, but that's very unusual. And my boss was unhappy about it. He's like, this shouldn't happen yet. Not because I made a mistake, but he's like, we want to make sure this doesn't happen. I want you to not have to work 12 hours a day on a tight deadline. So I think that I personally feel like, you have to prioritize what you want, and then you sometimes have to essentially pay your dues. But like for me, I want to work somewhere that respects me, respects my
Hmm.
work-life balance, and I do not feel the need. I don't need to have this amazing, huge career and make tons of money. I would rather choose a role that's a good fit for me, but I don't have kids, I don't have a house. And so I do have student loans to pay, but I can make those decisions comfortably because, it's not whether or not I'm able to pay my bills. And so I think that when you first get into the analyst, I tell this to people often on my comments and videos and stuff. When you first get into the data analytics field, yes, you might get a job that has you working long hours, the work is not fun, your manager is not kind, whatever, like we kind of have to do that to get our foot in the door. However, once you have that 6 months, 1 year's worth of experience, now the world is your oyster because
Right.
now you do have that. And so I have not yet seen a single person turn down a job offer because of culture, but I have seen multiple people leave their jobs that were even well-paying jobs because they didn't like the culture and they wanted to find a better role, even from juniors all the way up to seniors. I have a friend who just left a senior data analyst position where she was making a bunch of money because she hated it. Her boss was not kind to her, and she even had a fairly good work-life balance, but her boss was not kind to her. So she left and she got another better job that paid her more. And so I think
Yeah.
that, like stay true to yourself. Don't stay at that job forever if you hate it. But yes, your first role, you might have to deal with some
All right,
bad conditions.
I'm gonna pull Hunter into the stream. Let's rearrange this a
Hi,
little bit.
Hunter.
Hunter,
Hello.
you've been sitting on the sidelines for long. I was
I
planning
don't
on bringing you halfway through.
I don't know if you saw my desperate waving when I was sitting down there, but I was
Okay.
like, yeah.
Do you have
So
some questions and things to say?
I do have some questions, and so my first question is actually very similar to what Andrew Hahn asked earlier. He was talking about data portfolios. Um, you mentioned that the coursework that you did maybe didn't help you as much with recruiters. So instead of coursework, was there like a resource that was the most helpful to you, or for speaking to and showing off in front of hiring managers? Like, is it a data portfolio or is it something else?
Yeah, I have pretty good public speaking skills, so that was helpful. I like to acknowledge that when people ask that question because I think it's silly not to acknowledge that. But I found when I started with my phone screens, I got really kind of not a very great reception. I was like, yeah, I took the Google Data Analytics certificate and I took this Python certificate, and they didn't really care. But they were like, oh, but then some people were like, oh, did you use SQL in those things? So then what I realized is they were just going at, can you do them? Can you use these skills? And so that was early on in my job search. I didn't have that much of a built out portfolio, so I actually took a pause on applying to jobs, and I went and I was like, okay, I need to find data, I need to find some projects. And so I published like 3 more projects to my GitHub, like SQL projects where I actually kind of cleaned up the code, and I did some more Tableau projects. And actually what happened was, I'm not sure that the people at kind of the end of my job search who I was talking to, I'm not 100% sure that all of them even really looked at my portfolio. I'm pretty sure most of them didn't read any of the codes in SQL that I did because they seemed like they were kind of going quickly. But it vastly improved my way of being able to talk about it because I suddenly had language from learning all of these new things. I had the language to talk about the functions. And the last thing I think that was actually really helpful is I had my TikTok and my LinkedIn. So I was regularly talking about the projects that I was working on. And I think that was a phenomenal help for me because when I had a recruiter ask me, what is your SQL knowledge like? It was not the first time I had answered that question out loud. And when they asked me, do you know how to do these things in SQL? It was not the first time I answered that question out loud. And I think that talking about it was just massively helpful in my ability to present like I knew what I was doing rather than I wanted to learn what I was doing. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Makes a lot of sense actually.
Let me pull in this question. All right, so Diane actually is in our cohort, that's our career service cohort that's starting on Monday. Actually, let me back up. She asked him. This is the first question I wanted to kind of tackle. So she has years of experience like in a business function, but is wanting to pivot into the analytics space. Do you kind of have any advice on like how would you rank order developing skills for someone like that?
I think that I would start with learning SQL, and then I would learn a visualization software, either Tableau or Power BI. Tableau, I think I could use it for free, especially if it's student email. You can get Tableau desktop for free, so that's why I chose that. Because being able to have a portfolio that you can display, especially because Tableau just feels better to look at than a long list of SQL codes. But I think that if you, I saw your other comment briefly that you like have other experience in other roles that are maybe analyst related, but they're not analyst roles. I didn't have any analytics experience when I came into this role. I had used spreadsheets personally and I had done some research, but I was a nanny and I was a preschool teacher. And so I delivered pizzas, I'd been a hostess, so I had zero analytics experience. And so I was purely just talking about what I had done this year in my portfolio. However, I have talked to other people who have transitioned, who are transitioning, who are kind of able to kind of bring in related. Actually, Maggie Wolf on TikTok, I think she is the data storyteller. She talks about this a lot because when she first got into data, she had a lot of related experience in data, and she was able to kind of rebrand that and talk to them and say, I wasn't a data analyst, but I was doing a lot of analyzing data in my previous roles. And she said that can be a huge helpful step up for you in the interviews because, I mean, if you think about it, if you've got me interviewing who has just started learning how to work with data kind of formally this year, and then you who started learning how to do it formally for this year, but you've been analyzing data for the last 3 years, you already have a step up on me. And so I think kind of working with finding a way to rebrand that, I think is going to be like massively helpful.
You know what we could do? I could pull up her LinkedIn and we can look through.
I don't know. Would she like that?
Yeah, well, she literally asked me if, like, right before this chat, if I would look through her resume. But I'm kind of curious about, yeah. So she's one of my students. So this isn't like just some stranger. This is like
yeah,
someone
I know.
who's like in the cohort. So yeah, let me.
She actually just said yes! Exclamation point.
Oh, did she?
Okay, great.
Okay,
And
good.
Maven has a course
We
launching your
have
data
consent.
career. If you're on the Maven platform, they have this course launching your data career that I thought was really helpful. So if you're on there, look through it.
Share screen. All right, I haven't presented. Oh, I've got Iris on, so it's going to look a little bit.
Okay.
Yeah, it looks a little bit like what, sepia toned.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is her experience. So business and math teacher, business academy instructor. So I think this right here is really cool, or really great in that if I'm seeing this as a hiring manager, I'm saying, oh, this person can communicate findings effectively. They have
Yep.
they have 6.5 years of experience communicating complex concepts to a group of people. So that's huge right there. And then I see that you've already added business analyst here. So she's already taken some of the
Yeah,
hacks
she's taking those steps
that we've talked about. So look, Diane, you could successfully say I've got what, 3 years of business analytics experience. Annie, what would you say it would be a stretch to say that she could probably start applying for mid to senior level roles?
I don't know about the mid to senior level roles because I didn't apply to those, but definitely do not be intimidated by those roles that say they require 2 to 3 years experience. That's kind of BS anyways. But you do have it, and like I saw up there, you had like financial literacy on there, like the fact that you can work with numbers comfortably and you can communicate that, because a lot of what we do as data, or what I do at least as a data analyst, is not only doing it, but being able to communicate it is like the biggest thing. Being able to communicate it in a way that is understandable quickly, because the reason that they hire you as a data analyst is because they do not want to look at the Excel spreadsheet. And so if you just come in with a PowerPoint or a Tableau thing or whatever, and it's just got a ton of numbers on it, why did they hire you? You need to be able to tell the data story. And so what I'm seeing from your background is that you can very effectively tell a data story, and you can adjust that based on the learning needs of who you're talking to, which I talked a lot about in my interviews, and I use it now. I just the other day had a client, I was like, I don't think this person is not hearing me. All these things that I'm saying, I feel like they're not being heard. So I changed the way that I was talking to be more spatial and visual, and they started responding so much better because I picked up on their learning needs. So you can talk about how you can tell a data story in the style that they need, and I think that's a huge thing that you should pull out of your background.
Yeah, Diane, I'm curious if she paid like a consultant or something, because like I'm seeing 90%, I'm seeing 40%,
Yep.
over
Looks like she's
20%.
been, if she did it herself, she has been on the social media pages of people like me and my friends who talk about this stuff because she's done a great job.
Right.
She's put in metrics,
I
she's
would
put in a lot of keywords.
I would say just one little thing is maybe the headline could be changed a little bit. A results-oriented and
Might be
driven
too.
person. I think everybody on the planet wants to say that they're results-oriented and driven. You might wanna just
Hmm.
start with the business analyst that you have at the end
Yeah.
there and really
Mhm.
Hmm.
brand yourself as that instead of as just, a generic business person.
Well,
I agree
one
with
thing,
that.
yeah, one thing we've been telling students is like put like business analyst and then these like lines and then Tableau,
Hmm.
Power BI, SQL, Excel,
Yeah.
whatever.
Skills, put
That's what
skills
they
up
Yeah.
want to
there too,
see.
yeah.
Yeah, the recruiters, they want to see from your headline or if something pops up on a post, that you commented on. That's what people are looking at. I see oftentimes people will say like, I help teams make better. I hate those headlines. I think they are absolutely not helpful at all. It looks like you're selling your own personal services. And so if I'm looking as a
Right.
recruiter to hire you for something, I'm not looking for an entrepreneur or a consultant. I'm looking. So I think that what you said with the data analyst and then the skills is the best way to cut
I
search
mean,
terms. It's
yeah,
boring.
look at all of
But
these skills listed out.
yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, Diane, I'm feeling really good about your brand already. I'm curious to see like once you send over your resume, what that looks like. But
You should have her on
um,
the podcast and talk about how she built out that LinkedIn.
well, yeah. Well, I sent them a group message to see. They're starting next week, so like we have like this. It was kind of off the cuff. I sent it last night, like, hey, if
Hmm.
you want to be on the podcast. To where the last like 2 or 3, actually, I don't know, maybe the last like 10, we've had our students come on and talk to hiring managers or just people who work in the space. So yeah, I really like the new format, and Hunter's actually running it now, to where I've kind of taken a step back, to where
Awesome.
um, when we have like people with big followings on, I like to come on and kind of like, because I see this as like networking, like you're building a following. I potentially might be interested in investing in helping, maybe doing some sponsor posts or something like that. So I want to kind of,
Mm.
it's cool. It's almost like leading by example of like, this is how you build relationships. This is how you talk. Like, this is how, like, don't be
Yeah.
weird.
Yeah.
Like this conversation can just flow
Yeah.
organically. And it's like because we prepped maybe for 30 seconds. I was like, hey, this is what I think we're going to talk about. And you're like, cool. And then we just hit
And
play.
then you, like, popped me in for a half a second. I went, "Hi," and then I went back out.
That's true. Hunter,
Yeah.
Yeah,
I need you to take over the meeting now.
okay.
I'm trying to train him to take
Okay.
on more responsibility.
So
Yeah.
earlier, you mentioned that when you learned SQL, you weren't necessarily super interested in learning it. You just kind of did it. Were you
Hmm.
doing that? What was a motivator for you? Was it like the prospect of getting a job? Was it just that you found like a really specific, engaging resource, or what was it?
I really liked the Google Data Analytics certificate because I was like, oh my God, I'm actually learning for the first time in 3 years. But my initial motivator was I really did it so I could get better at working with spreadsheets, which is so funny to me now, because I'm not a spreadsheet whiz. Also, a lot of stuff
Yeah.
I learned about spreadsheets I like promptly forgot because I don't use Excel very often. I'm actually doing this huge spreadsheet right now of planning for New Zealand, and I'm starting to get back into it. But I had this big plan that I was like, oh, and if researchers have all these spreadsheets they need organized, I can do that. But then I was like, oh, I want to like finish the course because now that I've got this TikTok and everything, so I was like, I'll learn the SQL, whatever. But I didn't think I was going to like it because I've never seen myself. I've always kind of seen it as like boys like math and coding, and that's kind of what it felt like to me. And so when I started learning it, I was like, I'm not a math person, whatever. So I started learning SQL and I realized it was all just like logic and rules. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is what my brain loves. Like, I
Yeah.
love this. And so, like, within like one day of learning SQL, I was totally hooked and I was like, I love this. But before taking it, I was like, I just want to get the certificate, do the whole thing. And then I can say that I've done it and hopefully use that to help me get a side gig.
That's exactly how I feel because I'm in higher education at the moment. I actually attend High Point University, North Carolina.
Hmm.
And some of these math statistics classes that I opted to take because I figured, hey, maybe I would need some of these math skills in my job. They're really not at all like what I do for my job. They're like talking about, X bar and R charts and all this stuff. And there are certain roles in which those apply. However, I don't think they're applicable to every single one.
Yeah.
What is Ian Klaskowitz, I'm late.
Hi,
Yeah.
Ian. We're friends.
Yeah. So Hunter, I don't think you've met Ian yet, but Ian's coming on. And so Ian's got an interesting story in that he transitioned from a warehouse worker to his first analyst job, which is so impressive. And that's a big kind of target demographic that I don't feel like I can serve well, because I've got a master's degree and I'm 7 years in at this point. So I'm almost like unrelatable to them, to where, yeah, that's so impressive that I think he somehow positioned himself so he started having access to the data within the warehouse and then started running the operation more effectively.
Yeah, he really did the self-directed learner thing. Like, I'm sure that in his interviews, the same thing came through for me, that he is a self-directed learner and passionate about being in analytics. Whether or not he was excellent at it at the time, I don't know what his analytics skills were at the time, but whether or not they were excellent, he clearly is a self-directed learner. And he has, like, I've seen his LinkedIn posts, he's very articulate, can explain things well, and those are all really important.
Yeah. Well, I think also too, something that like me and him, he's been actually sending in on some of my sales calls. I didn't realize he had a background in sales before he was working in that warehouse. Like, he was selling like insurance and then I think medical supplies. And that is a skill set I think most people are not in this space. They completely miss it. They're
Yeah, me
like hard
too.
skills,
I'm
hard
not a
skills, hard
salesperson.
skills. What?
I'm not a salesperson.
Right. But what's interesting though, if you kind of like reverse that frame, what that means is that even if you're a little bit good at public speaking or communicating, you're going to shine like a diamond in the interview process.
Yes.
Because and I'm seeing this firsthand now of like,
Mm-hmm.
because we're doing like mock interviews where I'm like, all right,
Mm-hmm.
I will sit down with my students and we'll run through some like sample questions that are asked typically in an interview. And they are, and I mean this with love and kindness, they are atrociously terrible. Like it's
Yes.
like they'll go and they'll start like running on, like I'll be like, oh, tell me about yourself, and then 15 minutes later and they're like, yeah, and I'm done talking now. And it's like, what?
Can you're still okay. Can I ask you, you have to try and like cut in because people they'll just run with it. And you're like, can I ask you a question? And you never get the chance.
Well, okay. The way that I've been like kind of talking to them about this is that you don't know what the interviewer thinks is interesting about you. So if you talk
Yes.
and you ramble and you're like, oh, this is what is impressive about me, you might be
Mm-hmm.
completely wrong. So if you have some economy of words, so where like, for example, we're like I'm starting to actually put this into a formula of like, for example, how do you answer the about me, like, or tell me about yourself? Like,
Mm-hmm.
do you have any like
What's your
actual
elevator
thoughts on that?
pitch?
Yeah, like how would you? And I love putting people on the spot if this is too much on the spot. But Annie, how would you answer that question?
I have a very popular post on the subject, so I've thought about it
Okay,
before, not on the spot. What I say is just talk about your past, present, and future. So it's not a long-winded thing, but just talk about your past briefly, kind of what you were doing before, and then talk about what you're doing now. So for me, I said, in the past, I was just finished getting my master's degree in occupational therapy. Very briefly touch on my past because it really wasn't relevant to what I'm doing now. Present, I took these different courses. I stopped even saying the names of them, but I said I took these different courses in analytics, which gave me a really great foundation. And now I've been working really hard on building a portfolio and doing all these really interesting projects with data and really applying the skills, learning like hands-on and spending a lot of time on Stack Overflow. So in the future, like what I'm looking for right now is I'm hoping to get an analyst role that is a really good fit for me. I'd like to find a role that ideally I could stay with the company for a while and learn a lot and grow. I think that I don't necessarily want a role where I just kind of expected to just do one thing all the time. I'd like to find a role that helps me really grow in my analytics skills because I'm so interested in it. And so not only did I talk about my past, present, and future, but I have now drawn you back to, I think, my biggest selling point, that I'm a self-directed learner and I want to keep learning and I'm passionate about it.
gotcha. All right, so I've been telling the students to be way more succinct than that. like 3
Yeah,
sentence succinct. Like,
that's great. Yeah,
have you heard of Simon Sinek? He
I
wrote
don't think
like
so.
like your why statement or understanding your why or something like that. So it's like reframe the
Yeah.
question of, instead of tell me about yourself, like, why are you here?
Yes.
So it's like, my name is Joel. I've worked in IT for 8 years. This is literally a call that happened a couple days ago. My name is Joel. I've worked in IT in 8 years, and during that 8-year time period, I discovered that I'm passionate about data. I really like uncovering insights and communicating those findings to executive teams.
I think it
That's
depends
it.
on the person. I agree with that. But for me, I felt like I was really bringing my whole personality to my interviews, and I found that my approach allowed me to bring my personality and my kind of really interesting, unique story to my interviews. Whereas I feel like that answer is a more business answer, and
Mhm.
it's going to work really well for some people and some roles. But I think that I'm not a huge businessy person, and so I think that, and I don't know, I have no idea, but just gauging on the responses I got in interviews, the most positive responses were the people that really appreciated me bringing my whole self to the interview.
I think it likely depends on the role as well that you're applying
Yeah.
for.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
So
The person you're interviewing with and the role.
yeah, you should. I mean, it's pretty obvious. I think it's obvious most of the time when you're speaking to someone if they are engaged with you, and
hmm
so just adjusting accordingly in the interview is, I think, not too far fetched.
People look for that. Yeah, actually, the VP at my company, I sat in on an interview for a senior consultant one time, a couple times, and afterwards he said that we were going over feedback, together as a team, and he said that what he looks for is if this person was presenting their project. It's like when somebody is presenting their work to me in a senior level interview, it should not be a data dump. They should not talk for 30 minutes straight. It should be a reflective kind of Q&A because where they're like, okay, pretend like we're your stakeholders and you're presenting it to us. He's like, by the time you get to a senior consultant level in Tableau, I should see you frequently checking in with me to see if I understand what I think about it, even though it's an interview.
Right. Yeah, because I think there's this
Hey,
concept called like emotional bits. Or go ahead, Hunter.
your microphone is really boosted. I don't know if something just disconnected.
Did something just happen?
I
I
think
don't
you're
know. Mine's actually, you sound a little bit
Did,
louder, but not a lot louder.
okay. Okay.
weird. Nothing got touched.
Okay, don't worry about it. Never
Is
mind.
it
It's manageable. Just
okay?
yeah.
But what I was gonna say was the thinking that I have about make it concise, but make it chock full of emotional bits. So like
hmm
with what I said, it's like, oh, you worked in IT, you are passionate about data. Oh, you've
Yeah.
uncovered insights. Oh, you've presented to executive teams. So those are like
hmm
4 conversational threads that they can hook onto and say, oh, you said you're passionate about data. Tell me more about that. And then that's when the
Yeah.
story can come in. So
hmm
I think that we're not necessarily in disagreement. I think it's like
No, I think we're
kind of a
totally
yes
agreeing.
and, where it's like, but have shorter, punchier answers.
hmm
Because what I'm afraid of is that some of these, so like when I'm coaching these students, it's like, all right, let's come through like Diane did, and let's see all of the major wins you have, and then we can
hmm
put together narrative structures around 4 of them. Make
hmm
sure that you work that top story into the conversation somehow naturally.
Yeah.
So the
hmm
worst case scenario is that you start talking about the things that you're nerding out on, and it's like, oh well, I did this Python code and blah blah blah, and you're super technical, and you're talking to someone
hmm
who is a VP and they don't know anything about code, but what they
Right.
care about is like business outcomes. So you're
hmm
like spending 30 minutes talking about this in like a 45-minute phone screening, and it's like you're
hmm
done. And it's like,
Yep.
but you weren't a bad fit for it. It was just a communication mismatch.
I agree with you. Definitely.
Yeah, just know yourself. If you know that you're gonna start rambling about technical stuff, then maybe just try to keep it shorter.
And your
Yeah,
audience, know your audience too. And like kind of what
that's
stage you're at. I had someone recently who was like, hey, I have an interview tomorrow. It's like a third interview. Do you have any tips for that? And so I was like, yeah, I'm glad you told me it was a third interview because my tips for your third interview and your first phone screen, your first interview are different.
okay. I'm kind of curious. I want to push a little bit there of like, what are do you kind of have like high level advice for, well, so, okay. So the first, second, and third, what I've noticed is that it doesn't go in the same order. So it's like behavioral, technical, and then phone screening. So I guess the phone screening is always going to come first, but then the
hmm
behavioral and the technical might get flipped around. Do you have
hmm
any thoughts about the specifics?
Yeah. So the first phone screen, I tell most people, this is just from what I experienced too, definitely not a career coach, but the phone screen, pretty much most of the time, the person in the phone screen had spent about 5 seconds really looking over my stuff. They had not looked at my portfolio, they had not looked at my website, and they had barely looked at my resume. And so that the purpose of the phone screen that I experienced every single time was just, will you be a fit for this role? Like very high level, will you be a fit for this role? Do you have the skills that I'm looking for you to have, or do you have the interest that I'm looking for? You know, they know what they're looking for. And so they're just trying to get a batch of people in who have whatever it is they're looking for, whether it's curiosity, 2 years of SQL, whatever it is. So then your first landing with, the hiring manager and someone at the company is when you have somebody who's going to be more interested in maybe hearing about what you're doing. So you obviously need to tailor it based off of how technical they are, what they're asking. But whether it's a behavioral or a technical interview, you still have the questions at the end. So they were kind of asking about like, what questions do I ask at the end? On a phone screen at the end, you are only asking very high level. You're not asking specifics. Whereas in the first interview, your questions at the end, like it's your first chance to ask about the company and what the role would look like and who you'd be working with and what the day-to-day is like. So then by the time you get to the third interview, you've probably already had those Q&As, and so you kind of it's like, how many times can I ask the same questions? So by the third one, what I was focusing on is, as I went through further into the interviews, and this, I might be wrong on this one, but this is just what I did. I focus more on what will I actually be doing if I get this job? Like, what problems will I need to solve? What problems do you have that I need to solve? Who am I going to be working with? And so it goes from broadly the company into more specifically the role for me as I progress with the interviews. And it worked for me. I don't know if you have opinions on if that would work for other people or not, though.
Um, so yeah, that's actually, you bring up a good point about asking questions. I'm not sure I have great advice around like what to ask about the company. I guess you should ask questions that show you're genuinely interested in the role, is my general
Mm-hmm.
take on that. It's kind of my gut
Mm-hmm.
impulse. Do you, so you're saying you would ask about like, what would this look like day in and day out? So it's kind of like you're signaling that you see yourself in this role and you're interested in like what the day to
Yeah,
day.
I think that if you're hiring people, like I just really, I'm not a big small talk person. I saw these lists online of like questions you could ask during an interview, and I was just really disinterested in asking useless questions that were just there to position myself socially in the interview. Like I just am not
Mm-hmm.
that type of person, and I'm not going to ask those filler, stock, useless, tell me about the company culture. Like I'm not going to ask you to tell me about the company culture because I'm going to pick it up through every interaction I have with everyone at your company. If you make me go through 4 interviews and you don't respond to me for 2 weeks after every single one, that tells me about your company culture more than what you could say to me. And so I, for myself,
I'm going to
focus
push back on
more
that a
on
little
the
bit because
practicals.
you run the risk that maybe that one person's just an asshole, and it's like
It's maybe,
atypical. Yeah.
but
Um,
also maybe that one person you talk to is an asshole, and you're gonna get a biased view of their company culture. So I wouldn't
right.
ask people what the company culture was. I just wanted to see it. So
Hmm.
what I needed to know and what they needed to convey to me, were both there with the same common goal, to find someone for this role. And so that is what I focused on with my questions. And I've made a video on it, and some people were like, oh, well, how about all these behavioral questions you should ask? And like, if you ask whatever questions in your interview you want to ask. But for me, I focused on the actual, what am I going to be doing in this role? What problem am I going to solve for you? Because I needed to know what it would look like for me and how I can help them, because that's what we're both there for.
Gotcha. Yeah. I mean, I see what you're saying about basically it's like filler questions, like what is the vision of the company or what are your values?
Hmm.
It's interesting. I feel like I've had that mentality up until very recently of, now that I have a startup, I'm trying to build a culture. And I see the value of that, to where before it all just seemed like when I was in school and they were like, here's the school's vision of, think critically, act justly. That feels like filler to me, to where I don't know. I guess with the bigger company is, it's like, how can you even have a culture if it's 500,000 people. Like that's not what is that number, Dunbar's number, where it's like we can have tribes of up to 250 people, but then once you go past that number, it's like you're not really in a culture. It's like
Hmm.
it's just
You're in
the
subset
It's
of
how
math.
many
cultures.
it's how many close connections you can have.
Right.
Hmm.
Limited.
So
Right.
yeah, so I think that the cultural thing is probably more important for startups because I mean, if it's a startup and it's like I'm thinking of that movie where they were selling penny stocks or something. It was like the Boiler Room or something. Like that could be a startup, but that is going to
Yeah.
be a super intense startup where everyone's hyper competitive and they're like, it's competition is the number one thing. To where I've worked in a nonprofit where I've been on the board of a nonprofit, and it was very female dominated, and it was very like not there was competition, and like directness was just actively discouraged. It was like
Hmm.
we're going to like be very communal, and we're going to have meeting after meeting after meeting, and those are two kind of polar extremes. But like with smaller companies, I think the culture is much more important. And you're right, though. You can kind of pick up on some of these kind of
Yeah. Well, when I would
cues.
ask about my day to day with bigger companies, they wouldn't really go into anything to do with culture. But with startups, every time I asked about what's the day to day going to look like, what am I going to be expected to do, who am I going to work with, immediately I would start hearing things about their culture, and they would start talking about, because if they are trying to build a culture, they think about it a lot. So that would come up naturally. And then I
Right.
wouldn't have to ask about it, and so they would kind of in an unfiltered way just be telling me about the culture kind of passively, which I liked a lot better.
Gotcha. Wow. So turning point saying hours passed, and I just now noticed. So that's awesome. Annie, you've been a great podcast guest. I've really enjoyed this conversation.
Thank you. Yeah.
All
It's
right.
my
So do you
first
have any
podcast.
closing comments, statements? Let's plug your socials. So TikTok, is it Annie Nelson, and then LinkedIn?
My TikTok is Annie's Analytics, and then
Annie's
my
Analytics.
LinkedIn is Annie Nelson. I'm a kind of a unique content creator, in air quotes, because I never set out to be a content creator, and I don't really care about being a content creator. I thought I was going to shut down my LinkedIn account and my TikTok after I got this job, but then people were commenting daily and messaging me daily how much I help them. And so I'm like, oh, I can't stop now. But it's so funny because I often get people like messaging me like, hey, I want to hear about your strategy. In exchange, I'll do this paid, whatever, this paid post or this sponsor. And I'm like, I don't care. I'm
Yeah.
just here to help people and to live my best life. So I'm not to throw shade on you saying let's plug your socials, but I thought it was an interesting thing to stick in there that I am I there's so many content creators out there that are out there to be content creators. And I think that the reason that I've been at this level of success that I have is because I I don't care about that.
Yeah. Well, I'm saying people in this chat have been like really like enjoying it. And it's like they want to connect with you more. So yeah,
Yeah,
let's
I'd
do
love
that.
that.
All right,
Yeah, so
cool.
Annie Nelson on LinkedIn and then Annie's Analytics on TikTok.
All right. Well, Annie, I appreciate you being here. Thanks for being on the call as well, Hunter. And everybody in the live chat, I appreciate you guys tuning in and contributing. See you guys later.
Take
Yeah,
care.
thanks. Bye.